In Barcelona testing, many were touting McLaren to do something special in 2022, and you can't really blame them. Over the course of the Barcelona testing, they looked exceptionally quick, even in comparison to some of the front runners that we have in 2022. Lando Norris was coming off the back of an incredible season in Formula One, where he'd picked up multiple podiums from the McLaren team. Daniel Ricciardo was coming into a season at McLaren where he'd finally had a pre-season. He'd had the time to work on the car and get it closer to where he would feel comfortable. And of course, they had an exceptional Monza race last year, their first 1-2 in 11 years. It was all looking like it was going to go exceptionally well for McLaren in 2022, and they had a great foundation to build off of. Then we got to Bahrain, and Bahrain, McLaren was probably the slowest car out there. If the Red Bulls would have finished the race, and Pierre Gasly as well, then McLaren would have finished 18th and 19th on the day. They would have been the slowest team overall in the entire field. So how on earth have they gone from the slowest team in Bahrain to picking up a podium in Imola in just 4 races time? I want to delve into what McLaren have done, what changes they've made, and how they've been able to take massive strides forward in front of all of their competitors in such a short space of time. Well, let's go back to Bahrain to begin with, and let's talk about Lando Norris's comments, because he said, we have a lot of pace to find if we want to be competitive. And he wasn't wrong. If we look at the telemetry of Lando Norris versus Charles Leclerc over the course of the race, you can see he is losing a lot of time, seconds upon seconds, every single lap to Charles Leclerc. And now, yes, the Ferrari was exceptional and it looked incredibly good over the first 4 races of the season, but already Lando Norris is so far off the pace. But why was that happening? What have McLaren had to fix? Well, first of all, was the braking issue that they had. They had a temperature issue with their brakes that caused massive chaos for Bahrain, and throughout Bahrain testing, not only the Bahrain race weekend. Bahrain testing, it meant that they cut short a lot of their longer runs. It meant that they couldn't run the McLaren car for the testing that they wanted to do in terms of race pace. And of course, Lando Norris talked about how it wasn't a change in performance, but it felt like the brakes could catch fire at literally any point, which isn't a great feeling to have when you're Lando Norris going into the first race of the season in Bahrain in a desert, knowing that your brakes could catch fire at any point if they overheat. And, well, along with that, obviously, Lando Norris said it didn't have an effect on the performance, but the Mercedes engine came along with that, and the Mercedes engine has gone from being probably the best engine you could have had in 2021 to the worst possible engine you can have in 2022. And Daniel Ricciardo even talked about the lack of downforce in that McLaren car, the fact that it was just all over the place. And in Bahrain, you've got really tight, twisty corners where you need as much downforce as you can possibly get to make sure that that car is sticking to those corners. And that kind of rectified itself a little bit in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, Saudi Arabia being a lot quicker a circuit meant that those flaws in the slower speed corners didn't quite highlight themselves as much in the McLaren car. But you could still see the McLaren car was still miles off the pace. Lando Norris, though, had an exceptional race in Australia, and so did Daniel Ricciardo just behind him. And Lando Norris, after this race in Australia, said that it felt like a pole position just getting into Q3 and feeling like he had the pace to even qualify amongst the cars he was expecting to at the beginning of the season. And he said that the hard work the team had put in had put them above Mercedes in this race. And I think he made a great point. It's difficult to compare the 3 circuits, but if we look at Australia in particular, you can see just how much closer Lando Norris is to Charles Leclerc in terms of those telemetries, in terms of those lap times. But as I said, those 3 circuits are very difficult to compare. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Australia are all incredibly different circuits, all incredibly different fatigues on the tyres, the drivers, and the cars themselves over the course of the race weekend. But we finally got into a point where we can start to look at races and compare them, because Imola and Bahrain have a fairly similar structure to them and a fairly similar degradation to the tyres as well. I think the only thing here is the temperature difference between these two, and that was something that Seidel talked about in terms of the few factors that McLaren have been able to change and able to increase their performance. He said, of course, over the past few weeks we've been able to make tweaks and resolve some issues, but everybody in Formula One had that opportunity. McLaren were unlocking potential rather than making gains. So he generally thinks that the potential of the car was already there. It was the mistakes that they'd kind of made between Barcelona and Bahrain that had lost them some of that gains that they thought they would get. They're not trying to unlock potential. They're not trying to find time that isn't really there. They're just unlocking time that was there, and they seemingly lost over those couple of weeks. He said that we understand the problems that we have, and therefore we know how to take those steps forward. So it's clear to see that McLaren have taken all of the 4 Grand Prix now that we've had with Imola, and have learnt a lot from those. And it seems like lots of teams have had issues from really nailing down what they have done wrong over the course of race weekends, whereas McLaren seem to be right on the button of what they've done wrong. And even if you look at the telemetries, then we go to Imola, you can see Lando Norris getting even closer still to Charles Leclerc, and even at points, very, very marginal points, is going quicker than Charles Leclerc over the course of the race. Now, of course, this is because of a couple of different things, possibly the dramatic weather differences between Bahrain and Imola. It is a lot cooler in Imola, I think it's fair to say, and the dramatic cooler temperatures mean that those brake issues and the overheating brake issues are a lot less likely to come up. And that means that the drivers just can have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more understanding of what they're getting from the car. You know, the wet conditions favor, I think, the stability of the McLaren right now, the aero that the McLaren is running at this current position. Also, McLaren don't seem to have the issue with the porpoising like other teams. They don't seem to have that bouncing in the same way we're seeing from Mercedes and Ferrari in particular towards those front runners. You know, the Mercedes car, as soon as it's porpoising, seems really out of it and really unstable, whereas the Ferrari kind of porpoises but is still stable through the corners and restabilizes itself at the slow speeds really quickly. We're actually not seeing the McLaren porpoising that much at all, so they've seemingly got on top of that issue a little bit earlier than some of their competitors, and that's maybe why they've been able to take steps forwards in other areas, particularly, you know, cutting back on the weight limit. So we're seeing paint removed from various cars across the field. We saw that from McLaren very much so in Imola, where they took a lot of the orange and blue away and had that bare carbon showing. And also, McLaren have had no huge updates yet. I think that's the main thing to say. You know, all of these things I'm talking about are tiny technical difficulties that McLaren are sort of tweaking as they go along. They've had no massive upgrade, no massive overhaul on their car. And that's why I'm really excited to see what they can do for the rest of the season. Lando Norris is picking up a podium in Imola when there's still so much left for this car to come from. And, you know, Lando Norris talked about the difficulties he had in Imola, the issues that he had getting into that qualifying position, but actually he got so much out of the car in the sprint race, and he got so much out of the car in the race that I think there's a lot more potential for Lando Norris to really take more steps forward this season. Like, we just have to look at the Constructors Championship. Suddenly McLaren have jumped up into 4th place out of nowhere. They were seemingly going to be one of the back runners, and they've already got 46 points. Almost double Alfa Romeo in 5th place, and I think they've really consolidated that area of expertise and really consolidated that position for themselves in the Constructors Championship. And they said themselves, you know, we're not racing the Red Bull and the Ferraris. Lando Norris, just before Imola, just before picking up a podium, said that he had no chance of catching the Ferraris and Red Bulls in front of him. Yes, he capitalized on the fact that Ferrari had a poor weekend, but I think that's where we are, and circuit to circuit is going to be slightly different for the McLaren team. I think the temperature differences is a massive factor, but I think they're in a great position to learn from what they've done, and I think they're in a great position to make those upgrades count, whereas other teams are going to bring upgrades and they're going to come with different difficulties for the team. I genuinely think the McLaren have set themselves up for an incredible 2022 season after 2-3 races of poor performances, a 5th and 6th place in Australia, and now their first podium of the season has suddenly come to life. They've suddenly become one of the teams that I think can be a real front runner towards the end of the season, and I think 4th place is basically guaranteed for them, if not a little bit higher. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Are McLaren set for 4th place? Is it 4th place, or can they get that little extra step higher? Can they make it 3rd place, go one better than they did in 2021 in 2022? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Whilst you're there, leave a like, of course, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I will see you next time.